when you hear things, and I know that there's many levels of meaning to this statement, when you hear things like defund the police, to what you got into it for, the heart that you had for helping, for serving, for knowing, and this cry, defund the police. What does that do to you? What do you think about, and what objections, if any, would you give to that?
Well, I mean, I think when I first heard it, I think initially I was just, well, that's crazy. But I think that's my initial take. You hear something, and then you have to really, what are they really talking about here? And I think some of what they're talking about is police officers are tasked to do too much for their community in some ways, and to some degree, I am in agreement with that. I mean, you have this. If you can't get out of bed, you call 911, the police show up. If you're in a fight with your spouse and it's getting out of hand, you call the police to show up. If you're got a crazy person walking around and you don't know whether he's armed or not, or you call the police. Like, so anything that goes wrong on all these different scales, you're asking your police officer to show up. And he has to be a jack of all trades, a psychologist, security officer, be able to fight when he needs to fight. And it is a lot to ask of people. And so, some of these calls were like, we need to have more social workers and like for dealing with people who are, and I mean, we can argue the nuts and bolts of like, is this practical or is it not? And I think in general, I agree with some parts of like, maybe there's a way to lighten the load of what you're asking police to do. But I think the other swing of the pendulum is just like, I mean, it's Minneapolis right now. They're talking about completely abolishing their police department and coming up with, again, I don't know all the specifics, but basically doing away with anybody who had anything to do with police and coming up with a new community enforcement program, whatever that might be. And I mean, my thoughts are in general that I don't think that's going to succeed. And I think there are, we can aspire to live in a utopian society where no one is violent and everyone gets along, but I think the reality of the last 2,000 years has shown us that there will always be people who do not go by society's norms, and you will always have a need for people who can respond to that. And I think the real question we need to have is, how do we make this response better? And I think what he's talking about with why he got involved to be a police officer and how that would change today is where I just feel like this is like where we are in real trouble in our country, is if we turn against our police officers and you give up on us and you defund and you throw the hand and you just put us away, they're not going to rise back up again, or it's going to take a long time. And the damage that's already been done to like recruitment, like what we are desperately in need of. And I think all across policing in our entire country is more people from the communities that are angry with us. We need your help. Like, we need recruits coming from your community. We need the message of, you don't talk to police, they're not here to help you, you can't trust them. And it's led to this terrible untrust throughout our country. And the only way we can fix that, or one of the ways, is to have you come on board and bring back the trust to these communities. I mean, just philosophically talking about policing, I think our country has in some ways gotten away from what you were talking about, where you had a police officer who worked a beat, worked the local area. And from changes in how we've done enforcement, it doesn't appear that that's the way it's done right now. And so your kids don't have a police officer who drives around, who they know and they can relate to, and they can like interact with, and they can have a positive image of. We are in desperate need of having that, of showing and I think it's going to take willingness from police and unions and everybody that we have to make some changes. We're not perfect, and we need to honestly sit down and listen, and really listen to where we're going wrong. But at the same time, like, I would hope that we would have the conversation of where can we be better and not, you guys are just done. I'm fearful for what will happen in our country if the idea of abolishing police gains a lot of momentum. And even if it doesn't, if this continued, like, if this continued view of police are bad continues to be pressed upon our kids, and like, I mean, social media is how our kids are educated now. And if you're getting your perception of police from what you see in social media the last 3 months, yeah, we're not going to have any more police officers in a generation. I mean, it's just like, it's like you said, no one who would want to do this, like, who would want to put themselves through this, and so the stress, like one of the stresses of where we're at right now. And again, I don't feel it as much, I believe, as the person on the street who's dealing with it every day. But you know, it's just, is there, you reach a point where you're like, why am I doing this? Like, why? You know, I came in this with the idea that I was going to help people. I came in this because I cared about making a difference. I came in this, you know, the idea that I just joined the police office to be a bully. I mean, there may be some people like that. I'm not, you know, again, there's, like you said, bad apples in the bunch. It exists, but for the most part, you came in this because you wanted to make a difference. And if the world's turning against you, you know, what's the point? You know, like it gets to a point where it's very difficult to get out of bed and get up in the morning. And you know, I haven't reached that point personally, but I'm trying to put myself in like the eyes of somebody who's been working 12-hour shifts every day for the last 3 months, and this is all you see every day. And you come home and you turn on the news, and it's more about how bad you are and how you need to just disappear. It's, I don't know, it's not easy.
I would agree with a lot of that sentiment for sure. I really think if there's not a little bit of pain involved and there's not a lot of challenge, you're not growing. So I think the police departments do kind of like you mentioned need to look internally as well, because unfortunately, yes, there are officers and people at all levels who, if you asked them and they gave an honest opinion, they'd probably say, I don't think anything needs to change. I think we do a pretty good job. It's perfect as is. I don't care what profession you're in. If that's your mindset, I'd love to work where you work. You know, I used to work for a business that was very revenue driven, as most businesses are. And I don't ever remember getting upper leadership saying, you know, we did fine this quarter. Let's not try to do any better. Let's just keep doing exactly this. Not any improvement necessary. It just doesn't happen anywhere else. And I don't think it's fair for us to think that we're immune to that. I think you should always be looking to do better. And if you look at the history of policing in the United States, without getting real deep into a history lesson, I mean, it has gone through what most scholars think are kind of phases. You had your very, very early, you know, loosely structured law enforcement that people associate with, you know, counties, rural counties in the Wild West and things of that nature. And then the turn of the century, the Industrial Revolution, you started to see what are more like modern police departments. And then they had what people call a big reform era in the 60s, and then community policing that mostly our generation remembers being a big talking point in the 80s and 90s. I don't think we, as he alluded to several times, abolishing is not the answer, but taking an honest, hard look and going, all right, what's the next step in being better is completely fair. And that's what is needed, I think. I think there are some things that we can do better. Actually, I know there are things that can be done better. At the same time, as he mentioned, we need the community's help. We are nothing without the community. In reality, we are such a small segment of the population. Without the community's support at some level, we're worthless. And I would say out of the whole resurgence of this issue that I've seen recently, the thing that has, I can't say hurt because it wasn't me personally, but just made me kind of take a deep breath and go, wow, that might be the whole problem in a nutshell, is somebody that I worked with who is a law enforcement officer and is black. And he's standing on a street corner and somebody comes up to him during a protest and aggressively telling him, you need to choose between your job and your race. Mm-hmm. What are you doing? You should be out here marching. you shouldn't be a cop. And I'm just like, that is going to make the divide, the issue, everything just that much worse. I mean, it really kind of took me back and I was like, that just made it all a binary issue. You either have to be on one side or the other. I just truly don't believe that's the case. I think in reality, we should all be on the same side, and we should all be talking about what issues we need to be improving and how we're going to improve them, not just telling somebody, you shouldn't be in that job because of the way you look. I mean, to me, that's just absolutely ridiculous. But unfortunately, there are some people who are promoting those kinds of ideas, and it does, as he alluded to, it's going to make it so the people we need in the job aren't going to have any interest. We need more diversity in law enforcement. That is a statistical fact. There is a lack of diversity in law enforcement. Other career paths as well, but law enforcement is one, and we're immediately engaged with a community that we don't always look like or represent or think like or share the same cultures as. I don't think diversity can hurt the profession, but at the same time, how do we achieve that? Do we just force diversity and strictly start hiring other people now? Well, I don't think that's the answer. That's just putting a Band-Aid over the issue. What he was kind of talking about in the very beginning, I think the police are just the poster for the deeper issue. And that's what we need to be looking at and getting at the bottom of, not just yelling at the cops and the cops all sitting, grumpy and cross-armed thinking, nobody likes us, nobody wants us, so we're not going to try anymore. I think if that's where we're headed, then it's going to take longer to see the resolution that we all kind of need to see. But there's no one silver bullet, I don't think, that's going to fix the issue, as there isn't really in any community or workplace. But we just need to open it up on both sides to at least have a conversation. That's probably a start, I would say, for me. I'll give some credit. I know Defund has kind of become, I'll say, the media's choice of how they're presenting it. Most of the people that I've talked to even, have those kind of beliefs. When you really ask them, there's always examples, you look at Minneapolis, but most go, well, what we're looking for is just a different structure of community service. And again, that's something I think we need to go, okay, awesome, let's hear what that sounds like. And I'll share my experience with you, why that might not work, but that's a great idea, and that we really should start tomorrow, whereas this is going to take some time. That's the whole point of a conversation and working together, as opposed to just me going, well, if you want to defund the police, I think you're an idiot, and you going, well, if you're a cop, I think you're an idiot. Yeah. And then we just yell it a few more times and go home. Yeah. That's not the answer for anyone.
Absolutely.